Thank you so much, Nicholas. A very, I would say, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I would like to run this session like a masterclass, so I hope you wouldn't mind me walking around and perhaps even inviting to interact with you. How is that? Is that okay? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So just to give you a little bit background of where I'm coming from, last night I had the great opportunity to speak at the Global Youth Fest. Talked a little bit about my journey around the world last night, way back in the year 2011, when I had the opportunity for that 1 year to embark on an expedition to 22 countries. And I've worked with governments, businesses, and NGOs on social innovation and social change projects. Pretty much working as a volunteer capacity, as a planner capacity. Came back to Malaysia. I'm an entrepreneur right now. I have businesses in the fields of education, digital publishing, and event management. Most of you would have heard of this brand called TED Talks. And for my company, we hold the largest license in Malaysia, as we've been doing the TEDx Talks here for Kuala Lumpur for the past 4 years, heading strong into the 5th year for next year. At the same time, today we're talking about sustaining volunteerism, transforming youth culture. Who am I to share with you about this topic? Let's give a perspective. Number one, I started off as a grassroots youth leader. What's a grassroots youth leader? Someone who had this idea, who's crazy enough at the middle of the night, just woke up and said, let's set up a Facebook group and let's gather all my friends in university, let's gather all my friends in my community, and let's volunteer next week for a program. Let's develop an event in a month's time. I came from that school, using Facebook, going to university, getting my peers excited about volunteering for a good cause. Now, if you remember that one extreme, are we clear so far? Now, moving on to my right-hand side, the other extreme. Last year, I was offered a golden opportunity to relearn and to redevelop myself. What do I mean by that? Last year, it was the first time at the age of 25, I was invited to sit as a board of trustee for the National Student Volunteers Foundation under the Ministry of Education, where our patron is the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. Earlier this year, I've had the great privilege to work with Nicholas, Tan Sri Zaleha and their amazing team for the Global Peace Festival Malaysia, because I'm also a board of director with the Global Peace Federation Malaysia right here. So we're all the same, we're all sharing the same interests. And at the same time, recently I was also made the special advisor to the Minister of Youth and Sports as a specially appointed member by the Minister to advise the Minister of Youth and Sports of Malaysia about youth development matters. So I've gone from grassroots movement, getting youths involved through Facebook groups, going to university, shouting out top of my lung to get people excited to volunteer, to policy, where pretty much I'm involved with crafting out policies that would motivate, that would sustain the motivation for youths to volunteer. Are we clear so far? So I hope with this little validation, you would give me your time for me to share what I have in mind. Okay? First, this is quite historic. I rarely use a whiteboard. This is going to be one of my first few times. But I need to demonstrate something to you. So we're talking about sustaining volunteerism. Now, we understand that people would come and talk to you saying that, you know, you should sustain your spirit to volunteer because it's something good to do. Now, the other speakers, good colleagues of mine, great speakers, great experts in their own fields, they're going to tell you that later, how leadership is important, how just giving back is important. I'm going to touch the dry stuff. I'm going to touch about stuff that is in the system. So first, I believe to sustain volunteerism in anything that you do, in any organization, you need to have 3 components. Number one would be the intent. The intent of your project, the intent of your organization, the intent of your movement. The second element would be talents. Who are you going to get to be part of your team? What roles are they going to play? And last but not least, resources. Now, what are all these? Let's start with intent. I believe in my years of volunteering, in my years of working with government, businesses, and NGOs to move young people to give their time for the benefit of society, it always comes back to the intent, your intent of setting up the organization, your intent of setting up that project, your intent of setting up that campaign. Now, you may have your own intentions. You want to set up a campaign to promote anti crime, or you want to set up a campaign to promote more green business. That's fine. That's your intent. You have a bigger cause to promote. However, you have to now consider 2 points right here. It's what I call your individual goal. And the other one would be your collective goal. Now, what do we mean? Now, let's talk about individual goals first. When you talk about individual goal, you have to ask yourself, why are you doing that project? Why are you investing so much time in your organization to launch that project? Why is it so significant to you? And I'll tell you why it's important for you. As human beings, our motivations run out, especially when you talk about volunteerism, when you're not getting paid. So what happens is if you're not getting compensated in any form, your intent, your discipline, your principle has to be strong. So you need to ask yourself, what is it in it for you? Research by renowned universities and psychologists around the world shows you can be the most pure and most noble human being around the world, but in the end, each one of us have an intent deep in our heart. So think about it. What is your intent? You need to be clear with that and admit it. It's fine that you're doing a volunteer work and you want to achieve something. Some of your intent would be, I want to bring a good name to my country. I want to showcase what I can do through leadership in volunteerism, which is fine. Write those goals down, be clear. Are we clear so far? Secondly, let's talk about collective goals. Now, this is very important. Collective goals will influence the talent that you get. Now, when you start your project, you have to now think, what is your intent to get people excited and join you in your project, in your volunteer movement? What makes it exciting? Why should they even join you? I understand that some of you would think, I'll never know. Why would Harry, John, Susan join my project? But try to think, what would they want? What would you want them to become? Hopefully, I'm sure it's a good impact at the end of the day. But ask yourself, when you launch a movement, what do you want the people who will be joining you, how would you want them to grow with you? Very important. Are we clear so far? All right. Now, we're going to move on to the second part, that is talent. Now, for talent, we have 2 branches as well. You need talent, from my experience. So far, working in over 30 countries already, you must have leadership, and you must have what I call implementers. What does this mean? Now, to sustain the very spirit to volunteer, you need to understand the intent of the people whom you recruit. Am I right? Now, what's important? When you recruit them, you need to now help them identify where they want to go next, what phase of growth that they want to grow into. And this would relate to either a leadership role or an implementation role. Now, running TEDx talks here in Malaysia, as you know, is a non-for-profit. We work with a lot of young people. And a lot of companies these days, they tend to engage us. Multinational companies tend to engage my group, my partners, and my businesses to help them understand how to work with a very volatile group. That is the Generation Y. Right? The millennials, as some of you would call it. Because they said this group is so volatile, they always change their mind, their passion is not steady, it's not sealed in stone. How do you work with them? The average age of talents, employees that my companies have worked with are all aged in an average of 25 years old. My partner is the only guy who pushed up that limit because he's 32. But we work with a lot of Gen Y. But how did we work with them? The same with volunteerism. Before you get them involved with your project, if you want to sustain their interest for them to work with you, you need to communicate with them. You need to interact with them. How? Ask them questions. What do you want to do today? Why are you joining this project? Let them be honest with you. Some of them, they're going to tell you, I'm here to make more money. That's fine. Manage their expectations. If you're not going to compensate them, that's fine. But do tell them this. The skills that you will learn from this volunteering project can indeed help elevate your potential to potentially earn more income. I'm being very, very practical and straightforward here. As far as we work with young people, a huge group of them do come to us and say, I want to make more money. I want to make more wealth. I want to give a better life to my family. And we said, volunteer with us, develop your skills, learn from mistakes with us, harness your potential, and then go off and be an economical powerhouse in the future. So this is what we tell them. But as we ask them more questions, we tend to understand, would they want to be implementers? Where they're implementing a project with you, they are your operations person, they are your logistics person, they are your runners in your events, or are they more equipped towards leadership? Now, from our personal experience, having worked with over 300 young people as talent, as our employees, as our staff, in the collective projects we have done for our company, those who usually say, I'm not in it for the money, I want the experience, I want to empower more lives, you would most likely find that their motivation to sustain their volunteering effort would stem by giving them a leadership position. They want to inspire. They want to talk to their friends about what they have done. They want to prove that they have what it takes to succeed. While those of them who talked about, I want to be compensated, I want to be paid by the hour, most of them are most likely implementers. So you need to be clear. And if they're implementers, you need to talk to them to manage expectations. A lot of volunteers drop out of projects because their expectations are not managed. They go into a project thinking that they're going to get to know the presidents and the prime ministers. But on your event day, if the president couldn't come, you would have made them very disappointed. They drop off. So manage expectations. Be clear. Ask them, what do they want to achieve through their involvement with your organization, with your project, with your volunteering efforts. Are we clear so far? Fantastic. Now we'll move on to the last chapter, that is resources. For resources, there are actually 3 elements here. Number 1, to sustain any volunteering efforts, let's be clear. We have to have what? Can anyone take a guess? What do we need to have to sustain volunteering efforts? Resources. What's that? Money? Fantastic. Money, or what I would say in a more sexy word, funding. All right. What else? Come on, don't be shy. Take a guess. If you have an opportunity to go out and ask for anything you want to support your volunteering campaign, what would you want? Sponsorship? Okay, the sponsorship's funding. That's great. What else? What's that? Oh, sorry. Oh, you just came in. Fantastic. Right. People. Fantastic. People would be talent right there. But great. Yes, people. What else? Logistics. Great. Yes. Opportunity. All right. What else? Competence. All right. Okay. Competence. Knowledge. I would round this all up into something I call mentoring or guided leadership. You know, a lot of NGOs, a lot of projects fail because they don't get the right advice. They don't get the right people in their team. And most of the time, they just need to ask organizations to help them. And I'll share with you. Now, I have one more here in my list. That is, I'm not sure if it's important in your countries, but in Malaysia, it's very important. It's called endorsements. Now, quickly, let's just go through this tree. Funding-wise, let us be absolutely honest with each other. We can have an idea, we can launch a project, but at the end of the day, if there's no funding, we may have 100 volunteers, but if no one is going to pay the food caterer, our volunteers are going to go hungry. Right? You know, I was in Colombia and we built houses for the hardcore poor in the year 2011. What was important was I gave a speech to 800 people. They were inspired. They decided to accept my challenge to build houses, dedicated 4 days to do that. Now the problem was, how are we going to find the planks? How are we going to find the instruments, the tools for us to build those houses? Thank God we had sponsors during that time. But imagine if you were in that position. You have 800 strong men and women who are willing to help. But at the end of the day, you do not have the resources. So think about it. Funding is important. That is to help you to sustain the volunteering movement. And funding comes, from my experience, with you starting to ask people, starting to talk to certain ministries, starting to talk to certain companies, philanthropists, and getting them to buy in your idea. Most of the time you may be thinking that it's just a volunteering project, it's no big deal. A lot of successful people today, the more successful they become, the more they want to give back. And unfortunately for these very successful people, they do not have the time to build houses for you. They do not have the time to promote anti-crime campaigns with you. What they do have is money. Are we clear so far? So start asking. 2 more points. Mentoring, or what I call guided leadership. Very important. Some organizations that I've dealt with before with my training companies, like a mentor of mine, before I started my training company, he said, I'm going to invest in your company, but I'm not going to invest money. I'm going to invest my experience. I'm going to mentor you. And that makes a huge difference. I started off as a micro company, a tiny company. Today, my company service clients like Microsoft, Intel, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where we do training for young people's development in communication, leadership, and globalizing their minds to be more competitive in the marketplace. But it all started because my mentor, who runs a world-class consulting firm, mentored me and said, don't go for the small fish. When you want to hit the first big net, when you want to cast your net, go for the big fishes. Get them to know what you can do for them, and then the rest will follow. So mentoring is very important. That was an example. Go to organizations, admit that you do not have the expertise to do the project. Invite them into a collaboration where you can learn from them. Invite them into a partnership where they can give their expertise and their knowledge to you. And remember, when you engage people like that, your organization, your staff, your own leadership, yourself will be better than your organization, yourself, and your staff yesterday. Because you have gotten more knowledge and more experience and more expertise from people. The last point we have there would be endorsements. This has become quite important, especially in Asian countries, where I'm not sure, how many of you here have heard of this model called the Hofstede model of cultural difference? Have you heard of that? You may want to Google it, right? All right, now that's a study about cultural differences, about doing business, about doing projects in Malaysia. World-renowned professor Hofstede's model of cultural difference. Now, based on Hofstede's model, in most Asian countries, and I believe also in Africa, if I'm not wrong, he described as countries with a high power distance. What is power distance? Power distance means if you are a senator, if you are a minister in Malaysia, in China, in Singapore and Indonesia, you are quite revered. You are respected. People look up to you. You know, yesterday we have the honorable minister from the Prime Minister's department. He has a Tan Sri in front of him, a salutation title that was given to him as a form of respect. Now, in most cultures, when you have high power distance, it also means that people are indoctrinated into that culture, where people who have earned titles, people who are ministers, people who are CEOs of big companies, when they promote a message, most likely the masses will buy it. Most likely when you want to close a sponsorship, they will say yes to you because you have that person backing you. You have that person saying good words about your project. Now, I'll just share one last example before I conclude, and then I'll pass it on to my other colleagues with endorsements. I studied in New Zealand for 2 years. It was during that time when I studied in New Zealand, I was involved very actively in volunteerism through this student-run business organization called SIFE, Students in Free Enterprise, or today they have rebranded themselves as Enactus. I was involved in that project, and we were running 10 projects for the people of New Zealand. One day, I walked in with a crazy idea, and I told my teammates, guys, how about writing a letter to the Prime Minister of New Zealand during that time, the Honorary Helen Clark? And I got greeted with laughter instead. They laughed at me because they said, you know, she is the Prime Minister. Your project is nothing. It's small within the radar for anyone to consider you seriously. Your project is a university project. It's not even a regional project. It's not even a state project. It's not even a nationwide project. It's just a university project. Why would you have the insane mind to write that letter to think that she's going to revert back to you? I went around second time and I asked my teammates, I'm going to write this letter. I need your names. And they said, no, we're not going to be embarrassed just like you. So they were afraid of failure, which is fine. I wrote the letter in 2 weeks' time, the mail arrived into to my house in New Zealand, to my relative's house. I was staying with relatives. And my auntie went to fetch that letter, and she read the headline from Prime Minister's office. First thing, she ran into the house, nearly rammed down my room door and said, "What did you do? What did you do? Why did you get a letter from the Prime Minister?" And then when I opened that letter, it was signed by Helen Clark, and she endorsed the good work that my projects were doing. Even though we have impacted only 1,000 people, but still it were lives impacted. And then only then I started to realize what was even funnier was that 2 weeks from then, I had 3 more letters sent by 3 cabinet ministers. And they sent the letter saying that, "Oh, we heard from our Prime Minister that you're doing an amazing job, and we decided to write a testimonial for you as well." And my university was blown away. I mean, my university was surprised. They were like, "You've gotten a testimonial from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, provided the fact that you're not even a New Zealand-born student to begin with. You are Malaysian, you are a foreign student studying right there. What was your secret?" And I said, my secret was I just took up the pen, wrote about the impact that my projects were doing, and I sent it off to the Prime Minister. "Do you know her relatives? How did you send the letter to her?" "No, I just sent it to her office, that's it." I followed up with an email. So think about it. And using that endorsement, that letter, we went on and compete in global competitions. And it was through that letter that I've gained so much credibility that I've represented New Zealand throughout my university time. As a foreign Malaysian student, 7 times to global competitions. It all starts with an endorsement letter. It all starts with someone believing in what you do. So think about it. To get resources, funding is important. Mentoring or guided leadership is important. But endorsement, don't overlook it. I'm sure your statesmen, your members of parliament, your ministers, the CEOs, your mentors of your companies would want to hear the good work that you're doing. And to conclude, last but not least, when you're doing a good work, you want to sustain volunteerism, you want to sustain that very spirit of giving back, you need to start asking yourself, what is it in it for me to grow as an individual? What is it in it for the people that I'm going to recruit? How can they grow? And what's in it for the stakeholders? People who will provide me with resources that will enable me to do a bigger impact to my people. Thank you so much for your time again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. As you see, he's still very young, right? And you know, how he gets where he is now is because, you know, he has desire and passion, right, in what he does. And also desire to really now to share his experience that all these young people here in this room, I think, share same, right? That you want to do something good in society, and on the way, you want to achieve something, right? So I think, you know, he's really one of the example, and very fortunate to have him here, and I want to thank him again.
Thank you.
Yeah.